It all started in an ordinary kitchen when my housekeeper Margaret, who had been silent for 20 years, suddenly locked the door. "Mr. Anderson," she said quietly, but with an intonation that immediately put me on alert, and I set down my cup of half-finished coffee. "Please forgive me, God help me. I've been carrying a truth inside me for over 20 years, and I can't stay silent anymore, because this sin has become too heavy. If I don't tell you the truth right now, you might not make it to winter." She'd worked in my house for over 20 years, remaining invisible to me like familiar furniture or the clock ticking on the wall. Quiet, unassuming, always somewhere off to the side with a dust rag or mop. That's exactly how I'd perceived her all these years. I laughed. Not because what I heard seemed funny, but because my tired brain refused to take this strange, frightening phrase seriously. I wanted to say something, maybe make an awkward joke to diffuse the mounting tension, but she didn't let me get a word in. I didn't know that this laugh would be the last in my old life, and that I'd have to destroy the reputation of the most important man in our town with my own hands because of the secret she was about to reveal. Now, looking back, I understand that I did the right thing, but you be the judge. Before I tell you how my world collapsed, please write in the comments what city or state you're listening to me from right now. It'll be easier for me to continue knowing there are real people on the other end somewhere. Hello, my name is Alex Anderson. I'm 64 years old, and I'm an ordinary person who's learned to trust actions, not pretty words. I was born and raised in a small town where people live by simple, understandable rules: hard work, home, kids, church on major holidays, and conversations about keeping up with the Joneses. As a child, I rarely saw my father because he was a long-haul trucker and was constantly gone on extended routes, bringing home only the smell of diesel and a tired smile. Mom raised the 5 of us almost alone, torn between the garden and factory shifts. She never allowed herself to complain about fate. I heard the same thing from her like a mantra. Dad's on the road for us. He's our breadwinner. And I grew up with a conviction as solid as concrete that a man doesn't have to be affectionate, talkative, or sentimental. He has to carry the weight of responsibility, has to hold the house on his shoulders, even if it means living in endless trips and sleeping in snatches. When Dad died, I didn't inherit a savings account, but his old semi-truck that needed repairs and debts that seemed insurmountable for a young guy. This wasn't the start many dream of, but a real trap. Either I pulled the family through by putting on this harness, or we all drowned in poverty together. I started by taking absolutely any hauling jobs, not turning my nose up at anything. I hauled bricks, old furniture, scrap metal, perishable goods, slept in the freezing cab, washed with ice-cold water at truck stops, ate at cheap roadside diners. There were weeks when I'd only come home to drop off dirty clothes, hug Mom, and head back out into the night. I got used to chronic fatigue being the norm, and my loneliness an inevitable price for my loved ones living in warmth and with full stomachs. Gradually, at the cost of frayed nerves and sleepless nights, I paid off Dad's debts. Then, risking everything, I bought a second used truck, then a third. Hired drivers appeared, a small repair facility on the outskirts, my own dispatcher, and finally, the first serious regular clients. Over time, my small makeshift hauling business turned into a solid, strong trucking company, several dozen semis, our own warehouse, a bright office, and long-term contracts. There was enough money not just to live, but for a decent standard of living. We built a big brick house, bought a nice car, did renovations, started wearing decent clothes. But the price of my success remained the same as in my youth. I was almost never home. I'd come home exhausted, sleep for a couple days, mechanically resolve accumulated family issues, and disappear again for weeks, dissolving into the road. I met Lisa when I'd already gotten on my feet somewhat and could afford to take a girl to a restaurant. She came from a very proper, educated family where they loved to talk about propriety at dinner, about impeccable reputation, and about faith in God. Lisa, unlike me, often went to church, knew all the prayers, participated in church events, helped set tables at celebrations, brought food for those in need, collected donations. Back then, looking at her bright face and modest headscarf, it seemed to me that such a person was simply physically incapable of dirt or deception. We were married by Father Nicholas, the pastor of the local church, who was already a significant figure in our town. Everyone respected him, from officials to ordinary workers. People referenced him in disputes. He was invited to family celebrations left and right. People came to him for advice in difficult times. He had an unshakable reputation as a strict, principled man, a true shepherd. I perceived his presence in our lives as a kind of seal of quality. If we had such a pastor near us, it meant our home was under reliable spiritual protection. We had 2 children, Dennis and Claire, and I was on cloud 9 with happiness. I was absolutely sure I was living the right, dignified man's life, working hard, fully providing for my family. The family always busy with activities, wife at church, kids growing up in prosperity and wanting for nothing. I didn't see how the atmosphere in my own house was imperceptibly changing over the years, because I simply wasn't physically there most of the time. I didn't hear the strange pauses in conversations when I suddenly entered a room, didn't notice how Lisa was becoming too calm, too confident. Confident not in our marriage, but in the fact that I'd always be on the road. I became a convenient resource for them, something like reliable furniture that's only noticed and brought to the center of the room when it's needed for something. When the kids were still small, we hired a housekeeper, Margaret Wilson. She was a modest widow, a quiet woman who knew how to work without unnecessary questions or complaints. She cleaned the huge house, cooked lunches, did laundry, ironing, looked after the household while Lisa dealt with her social and church affairs. Margaret lived in our house for over 20 years, becoming almost a shadow of our walls. I treated her purely in a business manner. Work done, payment received. Sometimes, of course, I could say thank you for a delicious pot roast, could bring her heavy grocery bags or help with money for medicine, but essentially, she was just part of the established routine for me, a useful function, like a new furnace or a reliable washing machine. Everything started to crumble at exactly that moment when I unexpectedly didn't leave for another haul. A major contract was suddenly postponed for a week. The truck needed minor repairs, and I stayed home on the most ordinary weekday. For my family, this was unusual, almost uncomfortable, as if I'd violated the unwritten law of their existence. I noticed how Lisa started getting irritated over trivial things, as if my presence interfered with some secret schedule she'd gotten used to considering her personal space. That same day, When Lisa left on charitable foundation business, Margaret came up to me while I was sitting in the kitchen and asked for a minute of my time. I'll admit, I thought it would be about a raise or some household problems like a leaky faucet. But she stood there pale, with trembling hands, and for the first time in all these long years, looked me directly in the eyes. You know that feeling, when the air around you thickens so much it becomes hard to breathe? What happened, Margaret? I asked, feeling an incomprehensible sticky anxiety being born inside me. Is someone sick? She took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump into ice-cold water, and uttered words I'll remember until my dying day. When you're not here, Mr. Anderson, another man comes to this house, and it's not a neighbor, not a distant relative, and not some random acquaintance. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face and my heart start beating somewhere in my throat. My brain frantically went through options, trying to find a safe explanation, but Margaret's gaze left me no chance at illusions. Who? I barely managed to exhale, though some part of me already didn't want to know the answer. It's Father Nicholas, she said, lowering her eyes as if ashamed to pronounce this name aloud in such a context. The pastor, that very man who married us, baptized our children, sat at my table at every celebration, clapped me on the shoulder, and said with a smile that we had a strong, exemplary family, the one I trusted more than myself. Everything inside me snapped, and for a second there was deafening silence in which I heard only the frenzied pounding of my own blood in my temples. The first reaction was purely masculine, dull, and dangerous. I'll wait until she gets back and tear everything to hell here. But Margaret, as if reading my thoughts, suddenly grabbed my hand, a gesture unthinkable for her before. "Don't you dare yell, Mr. Anderson," she whispered quickly, urgently. "Without proof, no one will believe you. They'll say, 'A jealous old man lost his mind in his old age,' and they'll cover for him. You know, he has people. He has big connections in town. He has an impeccable reputation as a holy man. And Lisa will twist things so that you'll be the only one to blame for everything." It sounded terrifying, plausible. I'd seen too many years of how issues were resolved in our town when a person had high status and the right connections. The rage that had clouded my eyes with a red veil a second ago was replaced by cold, rational horror. I realized I was standing at the edge of an abyss, and one wrong step would cost me everything I'd built over 40 years. Margaret, seeing that I'd come to my senses somewhat, suggested a plan. Simple, cruel, but the only correct one. "You need to play the familiar scenario for everyone," she said, and firmness appeared in her voice. "Tell Lisa you're urgently leaving for a haul for several days. Walk out with a duffel bag, start the car, leave so the neighbors see, but actually hide at my relative's place on the other side of town and just wait for my call." She promised that as soon as Father Nicholas appeared on the doorstep, she'd let me know. I agreed because I understood I needed to see this with my own eyes. Otherwise, I'd either go crazy from corrosive suspicions, or they'd really make me look like a psycho and take everything from me. When I told Lisa that evening that I was leaving, I greedily peered into her face, trying to find at least a shadow of regret. She tried to act upset, sighed, shook her head, but her eyes gave her away completely. There was no sadness of separation in them, a barely noticeable Relieved joy flashed there, as if things would finally be normal in the house again, meaning without me. That night, the last night of my old life, I lay next to her and couldn't sleep. I listened to her even breathing and thought, how many hundreds of times did I come back from the road, lie in this same spot, consider myself a husband, master, head of the family, and didn't even suspect that I'm not the first or main one here. This was the most humiliating feeling of my life. Not just burning jealousy, but the icy realization that you'd been kept as a convenient screen for years. The next day, like a thief in my own house, I packed a bag and officially left for a haul. In reality, to a cramped stranger's apartment where I was to sit on a sagging couch and wait for the call that was supposed to kill my old life. Those 2 days I spent in Margaret's relative's apartment seemed longer than all my hauls north combined. Time while waiting for your own execution drags treacherously slowly, turning every minute into a sticky, suffocating eternity. I sat on the old sagging couch, stared blankly at faded floral wallpaper, and tried to forbid myself from thinking, but thoughts crawled into my head like cockroaches. I remembered details I hadn't paid attention to before. How Lisa would liven up at the mention of church holidays. How she'd choose her outfit too carefully for an ordinary Sunday service. How Father Nicholas would help himself to salad at my table like he owned the place. Before, I saw piety and friendship in this, but now every memory burned like a hot iron, turning my soul inside out. The phone lay in front of me on the coffee table like a black, silent brick, and I hypnotized it with my gaze, simultaneously wanting and fearing it to come alive. The call came in the evening of the second day, when blue twilight had already thickened outside the window. Margaret spoke briefly, almost in a whisper, but I heard the tremor of tension in her voice. "He's here. The car's parked in the backyard so it can't be seen from the street." I didn't ask unnecessary questions, just silently hung up, grabbed the keys, and went out into the cool evening. My hands didn't shake. On the contrary, some strange icy calm came over me, as if I wasn't driving home where my life was collapsing, but to a difficult loading of oversized cargo. I drove the car carefully, observing all the rules, and caught myself thinking I was delaying the moment of truth, because until I saw them together, I still had a ghostly, stupid hope for a mistake. I left the car in the neighboring alley, in the shadow of overgrown linden trees, so the headlights wouldn't slash across the windows. I crept up to my own house like a thief, trying not to step on dry branches and hiding behind the lilac bushes I'd planted myself 10 years ago. The gate to the inner courtyard was ajar. Margaret, as promised, had left me a way in. A soft, cozy light was on in the house. That very family light I loved coming back to from business trips. Through the large living room window that faced the garden, everything was visible as clear as day, because the curtains were carelessly drawn, leaving a wide gap. I took out my phone, turned on the camera, and took a step closer, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat, making it hard to breathe. What I saw didn't look like a pastoral conversation or spiritual guidance. I saw Father Nicholas sitting in my chair, in that very leather one I'd bought specifically for relaxing after hauls. He was without his cassock, in an ordinary shirt unbuttoned at the collar, holding a glass of my wine in his hand. Lisa stood nearby, her hand on his shoulder, laughing easily, relaxed, in a way she hadn't laughed with me in a long time. And then he pulled her toward him, and she habitually, proprietarily sat on his lap. I pressed the record button, feeling something big and important dying inside me. This wasn't just infidelity. When people lose their heads from passion, this was years-long established domestic intimacy. I saw how he stroked her back, how she fixed his hair, gestures of people who know each other down to the last birthmark. I stood in the darkness of my garden, squeezing my phone until my fingers turned white, and understood I wasn't looking at lovers, but at real spouses who simply used my house as a backdrop for their happiness. I filmed this for several minutes, long, agonizing minutes, so that no one, not even the most expensive lawyer, would have doubts about the nature of their relationship. When the pastor kissed my wife for real, dominantly and deeply, I lowered the phone and pressed stop. I didn't burst inside, break windows, or start a fight, though my fists itched so badly it cramped my muscles. I understood that if I went in now, there'd be screaming, commotion, he'd run away, and then she'd say I imagined it, that I was drunk, that I made it all up. I needed something different. I needed cold, irrefutable documentation of the fact. I waited until the light in the living room went out and they moved to another part of the house. Then I returned to the car and sat there for another hour, staring into the darkness and listening to the engine cool. When I finally entered the house, Father Nicholas was already gone. Apparently, he left through that same back door while I was sitting in the car. Lisa was in the kitchen. She was clearing 2 glasses from the table, humming something to herself. Seeing me, she flinched and dropped a towel, but quickly pulled herself together and plastered the usual mask of a caring wife on her face. "Alex." Her voice sounded almost natural, just slightly higher than usual. "But you left for a haul. Did something happen with the truck?" I silently walked to the table, sat down, and placed the phone in front of her screen up. "Something happened, Lisa," I said in a voice I didn't recognize, dull, alien, as if from a barrel. "What happened is, I came home too late, 20 years, too late." She tried to smile, but the corners of her lips trembled treacherously. "What are you talking about, Alex? You're probably tired." I didn't let her finish the performance and pressed play. Images flickered on the small screen, her hand on his shoulder, his laugh, their kiss. I watched her face and saw how it changed. First bewilderment, then animal fear, then angry, desperate realization that there was nowhere to run. When the video ended, such silence hung in the kitchen that you could hear the refrigerator humming. "This is edited," she finally forced out, but didn't even believe her own words. "You set this all up to—" "Enough." I slammed my palm on the table so the sugar bowl jumped. "Enough lying, Lisa. I saw everything with my own eyes. I was standing 2 meters from the window. Don't humiliate yourself even more." She sank onto a chair as if her legs had given way and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook, but I felt no pity, only disgust and emptiness. "How long?" I asked. "Just don't lie. There's no point in lying now." She took her hands away from her face and looked at me with dry, reddened eyes. There was no more meekness or piety in that look, only the tired, angry frankness of a woman cornered. "Always," she said quietly, and that word hit me harder than a slap. "Even before the wedding." I felt the floor disappear from under my feet. "What do you mean before the wedding?" I asked, hoping I'd misheard. "We loved each other since high school." She started speaking quickly, stammering as if trying to justify herself. "But he was being prepared for priesthood. He needed an impeccable biography, and my parents needed a son-in-law with money and prospects. You were the perfect option. Hard-working and simple, always on the road. You didn't ask unnecessary questions. You just brought money and disappeared. Everyone was happy with that." "Everyone?" I repeated, feeling nausea rising to my throat. I wasn't happy with it. I lived with you. I loved you. I thought we were a family, but I was just a sponsor for your romance." "Don't say that." She suddenly raised her voice, going on the offensive. "I was a good wife to you. You had a clean house, hot dinner, ironed shirts. You lived like a king. What more did you want? Sure, I had my own life, but I never embarrassed you in public." In that moment, I understood one terrible thing. She sincerely didn't consider herself guilty. In her distorted picture of the world, she was a victim of circumstances who just spun as best she could. But that's not what concerned me anymore. A thought flashed in my head that broke me out in a cold sweat. "The kids," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Dennis and Claire, are they?" Lisa turned so pale she looked like paper. "They're yours," she screamed, too hastily, too loudly. "Of course they're yours. How can you even think such a thing?" But I already saw that fear. I heard that falseness I hadn't noticed before. I remembered how Dennis looked like her and Claire. Claire had the same eye shape as him, as Father Nicholas. How could I have been so blind? How could I have looked at my children for years and not seen the obvious? "Tomorrow we're going to the clinic," I said, standing up from the table firmly. "We'll do a DNA test on both of them." "Have you lost your mind?" She jumped up, trying to block my path. "You'll disgrace the children. They're adults. How will you explain this to them? You'll destroy their psyche." "You destroyed their psyche when you turned our lives into a cheap play." I cut her off. "Either we do the test and find out the truth, whatever it may be, or I file for divorce citing infidelity. Attach this video to the case and send a copy to the diocese, and then the shame will be such that you won't be able to leave the house. Choose." She froze, gasping for air like a fish thrown on shore. I saw the gears turning in her head, how she was calculating options. She understood I wasn't joking. She understood that the old accommodating Alex who could be twisted anyway was gone. "Fine," she whispered with hatred. "Do your test, but when you see they're yours, you'll crawl on your knees before me begging forgiveness." "If they're mine," I answered, already standing in the doorway, "I'll give you all the property and leave with nothing. But if not—" I didn't finish. I left the kitchen, feeling my knees trembling, and went up to the second floor, to the guest room. I couldn't enter our bedroom anymore. It would have made me sick. The next week turned into a hell of waiting. I told the kids we needed to take tests to check for hereditary disease. I lied so as not to traumatize them ahead of time, though Lisa, I'm sure, had already worked them up against me. We went to a private lab in the county seat, gave biomaterial, and dispersed in grave silence. Lisa walked around the house with the look of offended virtue, demonstratively slamming doors and talking on the phone in whispers, locking herself in the bathroom. I felt like I was walking on thin ice in the middle of a huge river. One wrong step and the black water would close over my head. The week of waiting for genetic test results dragged not like regular time, but like sticky, endless molasses. We were all stuck in up to our necks. I tried to be home as little as possible, disappearing at the depot from morning till night, inventing non-existent breakdowns and urgent shipments, just so I wouldn't have to see Lisa's eyes. She chose the tactic of offended innocence, walked through rooms with her head held high, demonstratively drank valerian, and at every opportunity sighed, so I'd hear what an ungrateful bastard I was. The kids, Dennis and Claire, felt this tension in their skin, like animals sense an approaching storm, and looked at me with mute reproach, not understanding what black cat had run between their parents, but taking Mom's side in advance. The letter from the lab came to my email on Thursday when I was sitting in my office at the depot, listlessly sorting through waybills. The notification on my phone screen blinked with a short, merciless signal, and in that moment, my heart started beating so hard my eyes darkened, even though the AC was running full blast. Fingers accustomed to turning the wheel and handling metal suddenly became disobedient and cotton-like, refusing to make the simple movement across the screen. I understood that behind this click lay the verdict of my entire life. But putting off this moment was no longer possible, because not knowing was eating me up more than any, even the most terrible, truth. I took a deep breath, as if before diving to depth, and opened the file. First came Dennis's result. I waded through complex medical terms, allele tables, and incomprehensible numbers, searching with my eyes for just one most important line: conclusion. And when I found it, the letters swam before my eyes, merging into a black spot. Probability of paternity excluded. I reread this word syllable by syllable. Excluded. My brain refused to believe, clinging to a straw of hope, and I, barely breathing, scrolled down the document to Claire's results. Maybe a mistake. Maybe at least my daughter, my favorite, my princess, whom I'd carried on my shoulders and taught to ride a bike. Probability of paternity excluded. The office became so quiet I heard a fly buzzing against the window. The earth didn't open up, the ceiling didn't collapse, but inside me a huge scorched crater formed, into which everything was flying with a whistle. Children's matinees, sleepless nights by cradles, pride in first steps, plans for grandchildren. It turned out none of this existed, or rather, it existed, but not with me. I was just a viewer in someone else's cinema who mistakenly paid for a ticket with the price of my only life. I sat and stared blankly at the monitor, feeling not anger rising inside, but a terrible, icy emptiness. Turns out, I'd worked my whole life, ruined my health on the highways, slept in cabs, froze and starved for another man's children, for the children of that very man who taught me morality himself, then came to my house and slept with my wife while I earned money for their comfortable life. I wasn't a father or husband to them, just a convenient, reliable wallet, a provision function they tolerated for comfort. I don't remember how I got home. The car drove itself on autopilot while I tried to gather myself piece by piece so I wouldn't fall apart right behind the wheel. When I entered the hallway, Lisa came out to meet me. Apparently, she'd been waiting, beside herself. Seeing my face, gray, stone-like, with extinguished eyes, She understood everything without words. Her mask of arrogance fell off instantly, replaced by an expression of animal horror. She backed away, covering her mouth with her palm, and pressed her back against the wall as if expecting a blow. "Both?" she whispered barely audibly, and in this question was the last drop of hope for a miracle. "Both," I answered in a voice that had nothing human left in it, only the screech of metal. "Congratulations, Lisa. You pulled off the scam of the century." She didn't start screaming or making excuses. She just slid down the wall to the floor and covered her face with her hands. For the first time, I saw her cry not for show, but from real deep fear of the future. But her tears no longer touched me. I walked past her into the living room where the kids were sitting. Dennis was reading something on his phone. Claire was flipping through a magazine. They raised their heads, and I looked at them for the first time with different eyes. I searched their faces for my features, my nose, my chin, my eyes, and with horror realized they weren't there. I saw what my brain had blocked before. Dennis's high forehead, Claire's soft oval face, their manner of squinting. These were Father Nicholas's features. They were his copy, his flesh and blood, and I simply attributed them to myself because that's how it had to be. "Dad, why are you so weird?" Claire asked, putting down the magazine. "Are the tests bad?" The word "Dad" cut through my ears like a knife on glass. I wanted to scream, "I'm not your dad. Your dad's at church right now counting donations." But I held back. I had no right to dump this filth on them like this right off the bat, without preparation. They were adults, but in this game, they were also victims of deception, though they lived at my expense. "Tests are normal," I threw out, not looking at her, and quickly went upstairs to my room. That night, I made a decision. I could have acted nobly, divorced quietly, divided the property, left them the house so as not to traumatize the children, and gone to live out my days in a one-bedroom apartment, saving face. That's exactly what Lisa was counting on. She knew my character, knew I didn't like scandals and airing dirty laundry. She hoped I'd swallow this pill, wipe my tears, and disappear, allowing them to continue playing at being a holy family. But something dark, heavy, and relentless rose up in me. A thirst not for revenge, no, but for higher justice. I'd been made a fool publicly before the whole town, even if behind my back. Father Nicholas had built his career as a holy man for years, relying on my wife and my money. He'd lied to thousands of people, looking them in the eyes, and continued lying now. To leave everything as it was meant, becoming an accomplice to this monstrous lie, allowing evil to triumph under the mask of virtue. I understood they wouldn't get away clean, hiding behind a cassock and righteous living. The next day, I went not to work, but to church. There was no service. The church was empty. Just a few elderly ladies wiping candlesticks. I saw Father Nicholas. He stood in the center talking with some benefactor, confident, relaxed, glowing with his own importance. He noticed me and nodded welcomingly, even took a step forward to give a blessing. I almost turned inside out from this hypocrisy. I turned and left. But in my head, a plan had already matured, clear, cold, and merciless as the strike of a hammer. I knew that the coming Sunday there would be a big celebration at church, the anniversary of the parish's founding. The whole town elite would gather. Administration, businessmen, regular parishioners. After the service, they usually held a reporting meeting where Father Nicholas would show on a big projector hanging right in the church videos about community life, about trips, about renovations, and thank sponsors. I myself had been on those lists more than once, had helped buy that equipment myself. This was the perfect place and perfect time. When I got home, I behaved frighteningly calm. I didn't talk to Lisa, slept in the guest room, but no longer threatened or demanded explanations. This calm scared her more than screaming. She followed me like a shadow, looked into my eyes trying to understand what I was planning, but ran into a blank wall. "Alex, we need to talk," she decided Saturday evening. "How are we going to live going forward? The kids are asking." "Tomorrow," I cut her off, not taking my eyes off the TV I wasn't even watching. "Everything will be decided tomorrow. We're going to the church celebration as a family." "To church?" She paled. "Why?" "That's exactly why." I looked at her with a heavy gaze. "We need to keep up appearances, Lisa. You always wanted that. Reputation, propriety. We'll go thank the pastor for everything he's done for us." She looked at me with distrust, trying to find the catch, but the habit of hypocrisy played into my hands. She was so used to living in lies that she believed I'd decided to give in and preserve the external picture for the sake of status. Relief flashed in her eyes. She decided it had blown over, that I'd broken and accepted the rules of the game. Sunday morning turned out sunny and clear. We dressed festively, me in a suit that choked me like a noose, Lisa in a modest light dress and headscarf, the kids dressed up and slightly sleepy. We drove in the car silently, like to a funeral, though outwardly we looked like the perfect picture from an advertising brochure. When we pulled up to the church, bells were ringing, and that ringing, which used to seem blessed to me, now sounded like an alarm before battle. The place was packed. People smiled at us, greeted us. Someone shook my hand. Someone complimented Lisa. Father Nicholas stood at the altar, handsome in gold vestments, giving a sermon about the sanctity of the family hearth and how truth always finds its way to light. "Truly," I whispered with just my lips, squeezing the cold plastic of the flash drive in my pocket. "Today, it will." I waited for the end of the service, feeling the spring compressing inside me, ready to blow everything around apart. I knew that in an hour I'd destroy the lives of dozens of people, including my own, but I could no longer stop. The point of no return had been passed the moment I saw those damn zeros in the test results. The service ended, and that familiar bustling part began in the church that I'd always disliked but tolerated for Lisa's sake. Preparation for the ceremonial report. Altar servers brought out a portable screen on a tripod into the center of the hall. Someone fiddled with wires, connecting a laptop to speakers, and parishioners settled on benches, expecting beautiful pictures and thankful speeches. Father Nicholas sat in the first row, expansively crossing his leg under his cassock, accepting congratulations from local officials, beaming like a polished copper samovar. He looked like a man who had God by the beard, well-fed, successful, loved by the congregation, and sure of his complete invulnerability. Looking at his satisfied face, I felt the flash drive in my pocket heating up, as if it were a hot coal burning through the fabric of my jacket and the skin underneath. Lisa sat next to me, straight as a string, nervously fingering the edge of her scarf. instinctively sensing the threat coming from me, though I sat completely motionless. The kids, Dennis and Claire, were buried in their phones, bored and waiting for this mandatory program to end so they could go to a restaurant. They didn't even suspect that in a few minutes, their familiar world, woven from my money and Mom's lies, would shatter into tiny fragments that could never be glued back together. When the technical glitch ended and the parish logo appeared on screen, Father Nicholas stepped forward, straightened the cross on his chest, and began his speech. He spoke beautifully, in a trained baritone, discussing how important it was in our difficult times to remain faithful to traditions, support the church, and be an example of Christian virtue for the youth. His every word, soaked in false pathos, fell into the crowd, causing approving murmurs and nods. But in me, these words caused only a bitter, bilious smirk. "And now," he proclaimed solemnly, sweeping the hall with a broad gesture, "I want to invite up here our main benefactor, the man whose efforts renewed this sanctuary, my good friend and exemplary family man, Alex Anderson." The hall applauded. People turned their heads, smiling at me, and I slowly rose from my seat, feeling my legs fill with leaden weight. Lisa tried to grab my sleeve. Her eyes widened with sudden panic, but I gently but insistently pushed her hand away and stepped into the aisle. I walked to the altar, not like a sponsor going for a certificate, but like a soldier going on a final assault, knowing he wouldn't come back alive. I approached the table where the laptop stood and nodded to the young altar server who was responsible for the presentation. "Mike," I said to him quietly but firmly so only he could hear, "I have my own video material, a surprise for Father and the parishioners. Put this on." The guy, who'd known me for many years as the main benefactor, took the offered flash drive without a second thought and stuck it in the port. Father Nicholas, standing a couple meters away, smiled benevolently, apparently expecting another video about what a wise leader he was, or footage from our joint picnic. "Dear brothers and sisters," my voice in the microphone came out hoarse, and the echo carried it under the dome, reflecting off the painted walls. Father Nicholas talked a lot today about truth, about family, and about how the secret always becomes known. I, as a simple man who doesn't know how to speak beautifully, decided not to waste time on words, but to show you a story about what really hides behind the facade of an exemplary family and holy friendship we're so proud of. A puzzled silence hung in the hall. People sensed something was wrong, but couldn't yet understand what exactly. Father Nicholas frowned, his smile slightly dimmed, but he still didn't move, not believing I'd dare violate the script. I nodded to Mike, and he pressed space. On the huge screen, hanging right in front of the altar, instead of blessed pictures of church life, shaky footage appeared, filmed through my garden window. At first, a whisper of incomprehension ran through the hall. A dark garden, a lit window, some silhouettes. But when the camera zoomed in and focused, the whisper was replaced by a collective gasp, like the sound of air escaping from a punctured tire. Everyone saw them. My wife sitting on the pastor's lap, his hand sliding along her thigh, their long, passionate, completely non-platonic kiss in close-up, in high resolution, so every detail was visible, every emotion on their faces. The silence in the church became so dense, it seemed to press on eardrums. All you could hear was the projector humming and sounds from the video, Lisa's laugh, The clink of glasses, the pastor's muffled voice. "What is this?" Some woman in the first row shrieked, covering her eyes with her hands. Father Nicholas froze as if struck by lightning. His face in a second turned the color of old lime. His mouth opened, but not a sound came out. He stared at the screen where his double life was displayed for all to see and couldn't believe this was happening in reality. Lisa jumped up from her seat, knocking over a chair, and her scream cut through the silence. Turn it off immediately. This is a lie." But the video continued, and following it, scanned documents appeared on screen. DNA test results. I'd asked Mike to make the numbers large in advance. "Do you see this?" I asked into the microphone, and my voice, calm and dead, cut through the noise starting in the hall. "These are expert results. The children I raised for 30 years, whom I considered mine, are actually your pastor's children. He didn't just sleep with my wife, he lived 2 lives with her and used me as a screen and wallet to feed his illegitimate family. Real chaos began in the church. People jumped from their seats. Someone yelled, 'Shame!' Someone cried. Someone tried to break through to the exit, creating a crush. Old ladies crossed themselves, looking at the screen as if seeing the Antichrist. Men standing in back started cursing loudly, forgetting where they were. Father Nicholas snapped out of his stupor and rushed at me. His face contorted into a grimace of animal rage, nothing like the face of a humble shepherd. "Turn this off," he roared, trying to tear the laptop from the frightened guy. "This is edited. This is demonic slander. You'll answer for libel, Judas." He tried to grab me by the lapels, but I intercepted his hand. In that moment, I had no fear of his office, no respect for the cassock. Before me was just a vile, bloated man who'd stolen my life from me. I pushed him so hard he staggered and almost fell, getting tangled in the hems of his vestment. "Don't touch me," I said quietly, looking directly into his eyes, darting with fear. "God is your judge, Nicholas, but you won't escape human judgment today." The crowd had already seen everything. The crowd had already understood. The reputation he'd built over decades, brick by brick, collapsed in 3 minutes, burying him under its rubble. Several strong men, regular parishioners who 5 minutes ago were ready to kiss his hands, now stepped forward, blocking his path to the exit. In their eyes, I saw not humility, but angry masculine desire to sort things out by justice. But the most terrible thing wasn't this. The most terrible thing was happening in the center of the hall where my children remained standing. I looked at them and regretted I had eyes. Dennis stood pale as a sheet, clutching his phone, looking from the screen to his mother, to the Holy Father now being pressed by parishioners. His world was collapsing in his gaze, everything he believed in, everything he was proud of. Status, pious family, respect turned into a dirty puddle. Claire sat on the bench, covering her ears and rocking side to side. Black mascara tears streamed down her face, and her lips soundlessly moved, repeating one word, "No." Lisa tried to approach them, stretched out her hands, screamed something, but Dennis recoiled from her like from a leper. That gesture, full of disgust and pain, told me more than any words. The Andersons were no longer a family. I stood in the middle of the raging church, at the center of the scandal I'd created myself, and felt a strange ringing emptiness. I'd won. I'd proven the truth. I'd destroyed my enemies. But why did it feel so cold inside, as if I'd died along with their lies? Someone from the church council was already running to call the bishop. Someone was calling the police to prevent mob justice. Father Nicholas, having lost the remnants of dignity, tried to justify himself to the people surrounding him, but his voice drowned in the general hum of indignation. And I slowly, without looking back, walked to the exit. People parted before me as before a plague victim, seeing me off with looks mixing fear, pity, and respect. I didn't yet know that the most difficult test, the test of forgiveness and acceptance, awaited me ahead when the dust from this explosion settled. After that Sunday at church, my life turned into a surrealist movie where I was simultaneously the main character and an outside observer watching what was happening through murky, cracked glass. The scandal I launched by pressing one button spread through our small town faster than a wildfire in dry weather, leaving not a stone on a stone of the Holy Family's reputation. My phone was ringing off the hook. Acquaintances called, business partners, some journalists from local papers hungry for juicy details. But I just turned off the device and threw it in a desk drawer. I didn't need words of support or malicious snickering behind my back, because inside me, in place of former rage, now stretched a scorched emptiness, where only the cold draft of loneliness walked. Events rolled with frightening speed, like a snowball sent down a steep mountain, sweeping away fates and careers in its path. The diocesan administration reacted lightning fast because such stains on the church's uniform are needed by no one, especially when there's irrefutable video evidence circulating on every phone in town. Just 2 days later, a commission arrived at the church. Endless investigations, interrogations, and audits of financial activity began, which uncovered not only the pastor's moral fall, but also quite earthly machinations with donations. Father Nicholas was removed from service that same evening, forbidden even to appear on parish territory. And soon came the official order stripping him of his priesthood. The man who for years had reveled in his power and in vulnerability, who was used to looking down on parishioners, was suddenly thrown to the side of the road, deprived of status, respect, and income. In town, people stopped greeting him. Former friends crossed to the other side of the street, seeing his hunched figure, and store clerks turned away, pretending to be busy with merchandise. This was worse than any prison for him, for a man whose ego was inflated by universal veneration. Becoming an invisible outcast turned out to be unbearable torture. Lisa, in the first days after the exposure, tried to play the role of victim of circumstances, hoping that female solidarity and society's habit of pitying the weak would work in her favor. She went to acquaintances, tried to tell a version about me being a tyrant and despot who'd lost his mind and slandered an honest woman out of jealousy. But people who'd seen the footage on screen in the church no longer believed in her meekness or her piety, because the lies were too obvious and dirty. The doors of homes where she used to be received as a dear guest were now closed to her, and her phone was silent as if she caught a dangerous disease. But the most terrible blow awaited her, not from society and not from me, but from the one for whom she'd destroyed our family. When Father Nicholas, now just Citizen Nicholas, was kicked out of the church house, Lisa, packing her suitcases, went to him, sure that now at least they could live openly and happily. She apparently drew herself a romantic picture, two lovers rejected by a cruel world finding solace in each other's arms. But reality turned out much more prosaic and harsher than romance novels. Nicholas, having lost everything, was looking for someone to blame, and his malice, finding no outlet, came crashing down on the only person nearby. Margaret told me about this, who, as it turned out, had her own eyes and ears everywhere. She related that Nicholas didn't just refuse to let Lisa cross his threshold, but threw a scandal right on the stairwell. He screamed that she seduced him, that she was a witch who ruined his soul and career, that if not for her loose tongue and carelessness, he'd still be a respected man. He, like a cowardly jackal driven into a corner, renounced her, their years-long connection, and even the children, calling them your offspring that I have nothing to feed now. For Lisa, this was the end of the world, because she suddenly realized a terrible, merciless truth. She'd traded a reliable, faithful husband, a stone wall, for a coward and egoist who used her only while it was safe and convenient. And what about the kids? Dennis and Claire found themselves at the epicenter of this explosion without any protection. Their picture of the world was collapsing with the roar of falling skyscrapers. They moved to a rental apartment that Dennis got, not wanting to stay in a house soaked with lies, but also unable to go to their mother, whom they now despised. I didn't call them, didn't seek meetings, thinking they needed time to digest the truth, but my heart ached for them hourly. I knew they'd also tried to make contact with their biological father. After all, blood will tell, and in their heads probably lived hope that their real dad would turn out better than the one who'd exposed them. But Nicholas, true to his new tactic of saving his own skin, pushed them away too. When Dennis came to talk man to man, he didn't even open the door, yelling through the peephole that they shouldn't dare hang their problems on him because his life was already broken. For Dennis, who'd always sought male authority, this was a gut punch that knocked the last remnants of illusions out of him. He saw before him not a righteous father, but a pathetic old man trembling for his hide, for whom his own children were just an annoying burden. I remained in my huge empty house alone, if you don't count Margaret, who continued coming and silently doing her work. The divorce went quickly and dirty, though I expected worse. Lisa, crushed by her lover's betrayal and the whole town's contempt, had no strength to fight. She signed all the papers without looking, agreeing to a settlement that would be enough to buy a small apartment on the outskirts, and disappeared from the radar. I heard she'd gone to some distant aunts in another region, unable to bear the shame and condemning looks. I didn't feel sorry for her. Pity had burned out of me back when I watched that video in the garden, but I didn't feel gloating either, just a dull, heavy fatigue of a man who'd buried someone close. One evening, when the first autumn snow was already falling outside, I sat in the kitchen staring at cooling tea. Margaret was fussing at the stove, and her presence was the only living warmth in this icy kingdom. "You're wrong, Mr. Anderson, to have given up on yourself," she suddenly said without turning around. "The house is empty, not because there are no people in it, but because you've closed the doors." "Who should I be waiting for, Margaret?" I smiled bitterly. "Strangers' children, or look for a new wife in my old age?" "Blood isn't everything," she answered quietly, and in her voice sounded that same firmness as on the day of our first conversation. "You raised them. You loved them. You were with them when their stomachs hurt, And when they got bad grades, and he just contributed seed. Seed isn't a father. A father is the one who taught them to walk and who offered his shoulder. I wanted to object, say that lies poisoned everything, that the mother's betrayal crossed out my efforts, but the words stuck in my throat. I remembered teaching little Dennis to hold a hammer, how he hit his finger and cried, burying his face in my shoulder, not his mother's. Remembered how Claire, when her first boyfriend dumped her, cried all night in my office while I stroked her head and made tea. Could a piece of paper with DNA results cancel that? Were the feelings I experienced then fake? No, the feelings were real. Only the foundation we built on was fake. But the building itself of our attachment might still stand if not for my pride. In that moment, I first wondered if I'd done the right thing pushing them away along with their mother. I'd punished Lisa. I'd destroyed Nicholas. But hadn't I also punished those who were guilty only of being born from the wrong person? The doorbell rang. The ring sounded sharp and unexpected, tearing through the house's silence like a gunshot. I flinched and looked at the clock. It was already late, almost 10 p.m. I wasn't expecting guests. Couriers don't come to this neighborhood so late. Margaret looked at me questioningly, wiping her hands on her apron, but I stopped her with a gesture. I'll get it myself. On the doorstep, under the light of the street lamp, in which rare snowflakes swirled, stood Dennis. He looked aged by 10 years, a gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, stubble he'd never worn before. He stood hunched, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, looking not at me, but somewhere at the floor, at my house slippers. "Can I come in?" he asked hoarsely. And in that voice was none of his former self-confidence or filial demandingness. This was the voice of a man who had nowhere else to go. I stepped aside, letting him in, and this simple gesture was harder for me than unloading a semi of cement. Dennis came into the hallway. He didn't take off his shoes, walked right into the kitchen in dirty boots, leaving wet tracks on the perfect parquet. But I, a man who'd always chased household members for cleanliness, didn't even look at the floor. Now something much more important than preserving laminate was being decided. Now it was being decided whether I'd remain alone in this huge house until the end of my days, or if meaning would appear in it again. Dennis sat at the table in the spot where Lisa usually sat and placed a bundle of keys in front of him. I recognized them. These were keys to the apartment we and my wife had given him when he graduated from college. "I moved out," he said dully, not raising his eyes. "Left everything there, furniture, appliances, clothes. I don't want anything bought with your money. That is, with money you gave thinking I was—" He stumbled, and his Adam's apple jerked, holding back a spasm. I silently placed a cup of tea in front of him that Margaret had poured. She, wise woman, quietly disappeared into her room, understanding this conversation didn't tolerate extra ears. "I went to see him," Dennis suddenly blurted out, and an angry, offended note broke through his voice, just like in childhood when he was unfairly punished. "To Nicholas. Thought we'd talk, man to man. Thought he'd at least say something, explain. But he wouldn't even open the door. Yelled through the door that Mom and I ruined his life, that we're mistakes of his youth. Mistakes, you understand? I'm not a son to him. I'm compromising material." I listened to him and felt a strange, painful work happening inside me. Just yesterday, I was sure I hated them all, the lying wife, the vile pastor, and these children carrying someone else's blood. But now, looking at the hunched, crushed guy who was 30 years old but looked like a lost teenager, I suddenly saw not the biological material of a rival, but that very boy I'd taught to swim in the river, that very Dennis who'd call me on halls and ask when Dad was coming home. Did that boy lie to me? No, he loved me sincerely because he had no other father. "Why did you come, Dennis?" I asked quietly. "Need money or a place to live?" He threw up his head, and I saw tears in his eyes. Angry, masculine tears that burned the eyes. "Screw your money," he yelled, hitting the table with his fist. I came to say that I don't give a damn about tests, don't give a damn about genetics, don't give a damn about who slept with whom 30 years ago. A father isn't the one who knocked someone up and forgot. A father is the one who was there. He fell silent, breathing heavily, as if he'd run a marathon. "I remember how you picked me up from the police station when we broke that store window," he continued more quietly, looking away. "Mom threw a fit then, screamed that I was disgracing the family, and you silently paid the fine, led me out to the porch, and gave me a smack on the head, and said, 'A man answers for his own screw-ups himself.' You didn't rat me out then, didn't humiliate me, you taught me. And he taught us to smile and light candles." Silence hung in the room, but this was no longer the dead silence of a crypt that had reigned here in recent weeks. This was silence in which truth was being born, bitter, but alive. "I can't make you consider me your son," Dennis said, standing up. "I understand you're disgusted. You look at me and see him, but I want you to know, for me, you're the only dad, and I don't need another one even if you kick me out now." He turned and headed for the exit, hunching, expecting a blow in the back. And in that moment, I understood that if I stayed silent now, if I let him leave, I'd commit a crime worse than what Lisa and Nicholas committed. They betrayed me out of cowardice and lust, and I'd betray a person out of pride. "Wait," I called out to him. Dennis froze in the doorway without turning around. "Take off your boots," I grumbled in my usual household tone. "You tracked in like an elephant. And go wash your hands. Margaret reheated the meatloaf." I saw his shoulders shake. He slowly turned around, and on his face was such a mix of disbelief and gratitude that my own eyes stung. We didn't rush into each other's arms. There were no scenes from soap operas. We're men. We don't know how to do that. But we sat at the table and for the first time in many years, talked for real, without masks, without the desire to meet some status. And an hour later, Claire arrived. She didn't enter like her brother. She flew into the house like a whirlwind, tear-stained with smeared mascara, and seeing me, just fell on my chest. She didn't say any loud words about choice and masculine responsibility. She just sobbed, burying her face in my shoulder, repeating, "Daddy, Daddy, how could this happen?" And I, stroking her trembling back, breathing in the familiar smell of her perfume, understood, finally, blood is water. Real kinship is created not in bed, but in sleepless nights by a child's crib, in shared holidays, in illnesses survived together, in thousands of little things life is woven from. They were my children, mine, because I'd invested my soul, my time, my life in them, and no Nicholas, no DNA test could take away this right from me. The right to be a father that I'd earned with 30 years of labor and care, That evening, we sat in the kitchen as a foursome, me, Dennis, Claire, and Margaret, drinking tea. We didn't discuss Lisa, didn't remember Nicholas. We talked about the future. Dennis said he wanted to leave the cushy office job his mother had gotten him through connections and come work for me in the company, but not as a manager, as a regular logistics guy to understand how it works. Claire, who'd always been under her mother's influence and dreamed of society life, suddenly said she wanted to go volunteer at a hospital because she was ashamed of the hypocrisy she'd lived in. I looked at them and saw how the collapsed lie, burying the perfect picture under it, freed living people. The pain of betrayal didn't go anywhere. It sat in me like a sharp splinter, and I knew it would ache with the weather for many more years. But alongside this pain, something new appeared, a feeling of dignity and real hard-won closeness. We remained a family, not the pious family from a poster, but a wounded, battered but real pack that decided to stick together despite the storm. But there was still one person I needed to meet to put the final period, the person where it all began. A week later, I went to the diocese, not to complain, not to demand. I just wanted to pick up annulment documents to formally close this chapter before God, since I'd closed it before people. Leaving the administration building, I saw Nicholas. He sat on a bench in the park in civilian clothes that hung on him like a sack, without a cassock, without a gold cross, without the beard he'd shaved, apparently trying to change its appearance. He looked pathetic, bloated. He was feeding pigeons, throwing them crumbs of stale bread. And in this gesture was so much loneliness, it was eerie. He raised his eyes and saw me. I expected malice, curses, screaming, but he looked at me with an empty, extinguished gaze of a man who'd already lost everything. "Are you satisfied, Alex?" he asked hoarsely without getting up. "You got your truth? You destroyed me. Are you satisfied?" I stopped across from him, looking down at him. Before I looked up at him as a spiritual mentor. Now before me sat just a weak man crushed by his own sins. "No, Nicholas," I answered calmly. "I'm not satisfied. I'm just alive. And you?" "But they're mine," he suddenly said with some childish offense. "The kids, they're mine by blood. You stole them from me." "I didn't steal." I shook my head. "You threw them away yourself. You traded them for comfort, for a career, for fear. You renounced them every day for 30 years when you came to my house and played the role of guest. And now, it's too late to claim rights to a harvest you didn't grow." I turned and walked to the car, feeling an invisible burden fall from my shoulders with each step. I was leaving him there on the bench in his personal hell of loneliness and accusations. And home was waiting for me. A home where light would be on in the evening, where Dennis and Claire would be arguing, where Margaret would be grumbling about unwashed dishes. 6 months had passed since the day my familiar world collapsed. And winter this year turned out surprisingly snowy, as if nature decided to cover all those scars remaining on the ground and in our souls with a white blanket. Time, of course, doesn't heal the way they write about it in books. It doesn't erase memory and doesn't return youth, but it does a great job of dulling sharp corners, turning open wounds into rough but reliable scars you can quite live with. The house changed, though the walls remained the same. Dennis, Claire, and I undertook a small renovation, deciding to get rid of everything reminding us of Lisa's era and her striving for ostentatious luxury. We took out heavy velvet curtains that always seemed like dust collectors to me, removed pretentious paintings in gilded frames, and repainted the living room in light, calm tones. But the main change happened not in the interior, but in the very atmosphere of this place. Fear of nonconformity left the house. The tension disappeared when you're afraid to put your elbows on the table or say something wrong. Now you could laugh loudly here, walk around in stretched sweaters, and argue until you're hoarse without fearing it would ruin karma or upset Mom. Dennis really did quit the office and came to work for me at the depot, starting with the simplest dispatcher position to understand how the business gears turn. I saw how hard it was for him, how his habit of easy living broke him, but he gritted his teeth and didn't complain. And for the first time in many years, I began to feel toward him not just blind parental love, but real masculine respect. Claire also found herself. She didn't go into volunteering as she wanted in the heat of the moment, but got a job as an administrator at a small veterinary clinic. And this work, where you need a lot of empathy and patience, unexpectedly made her more mature and calmer. We almost didn't talk about Lisa, as if we'd concluded an unspoken non-aggression pact on the past. I knew through mutual acquaintances that she lived in a neighboring county, worked either as a salesperson or cashier, and seemed to have started attending some other church, trying to atone for sins or, more likely, find new consolation. I didn't wish her ill, but the desire to see her or hear her voice never arose even once. She became for me like a read book with torn-out pages that there's no point returning to. Margaret stayed with us, but now she was no longer a voiceless shadow gliding through corners with a rag. We often drank tea together in the evenings, and I learned more about her in these 6 months than in the previous 20 years. About her grandchildren, about her favorite books, about how she, it turns out, knits beautifully. She became the keeper of our new honest hearth, that very moral tuning fork that didn't let us hit false notes. That evening, on Christmas Eve, we gathered in the living room to decorate the tree. For the first time in many years, we did it ourselves, without hired designers who used to create a stylish composition for guests. We got out old boxes with ornaments, many of which I remembered from Dennis's childhood, and fooled around like little kids, hanging glass balls and getting tangled in garlands. At some point, I walked over to the fireplace and picked up an old family album, heavy in a leather binding, full of professionally retouched photographs. From the glossy pages, perfectly coiffed, smiling people looked at me, successful businessman Alex, pious wife Lisa, exemplary children. This was a beautiful, expensive success story with not a word of truth in it. Just glossy lies we so diligently sold to others and ourselves. I called the kids over. "Look," I said, opening a spread where we stood against the church, and next to us, his hand on my shoulder, Father Nicholas smiled. "Beautiful, right?" Dennis winced as from a toothache, and Claire lowered her eyes. "Dad, why did you get that out? Let's throw it in the trash." "No." I shook my head, feeling amazing clarity in my thoughts. Throwing away history is the lot of cowards. We'll keep this album, but we'll put it on the farthest shelf in the darkest corner of the closet. Let it lie there as a reminder of what happens when you don't live your own life. I closed the heavy book like closing a coffin lid and set it aside. "Now, come here," I commanded. taking out my phone. Let's take a normal photo without Photoshop, without staging, just as we are. We huddled together against the half-decorated tree. Dennis in a ridiculous sweater with reindeer. Claire with disheveled hair. Margaret trying to hide behind my shoulder. And me, gray-haired, tired, with wrinkles I no longer wanted to hide. I stretched out my arm trying to catch everyone in frame. My hand trembled. Someone blinked. Someone laughed at the most inappropriate moment. The shot came out unfocused, slightly blurred, and completely unsuitable for a magazine cover. But when I looked at the screen, I saw more life and light in it than in all those professional photo shoots combined. There were living people there, my family, my real, hard-won, imperfect family that had gone through fire and water to find each other anew. I looked at this photo and understood that for the first time in 64 years, I was absolutely happy. Not because everything was good for me, but because everything was honest. I was no longer a wallet, not a screen, not furniture. I was a father chosen not by right of blood, but by right of love and actions. And this title was worth surviving the collapse of the whole world for. I've lived a long life, made a bunch of mistakes, and understood one simple thing too late. Never be afraid of the truth, no matter how scary it seems. Lies are credit we take from life at predatory interest rates. And sooner or later, collectors will knock on the door to take everything. Live so you don't need to hide your phone, delete messages, and fear your own reflection in the mirror. Please find time today. Go to your loved ones, look them in the eyes, and ask yourself, is everything between us for real? And finally, I want to ask you one question that's haunted me all these months, and the answer to which I found for myself at too high a price. What do you think, friends? Does a person have the right to lie for salvation if it preserves the family and children's peace? Or is any, even the most murderous truth, better than life in a sweet illusion? Write what you think. It's really important for me to know. Now I'm going to go. Our tea's getting cold. Take care of yourselves.